The scream cut through the rain, thin and terrified, swallowed by the roar of water. Arya Moretti stopped dead on the slick sidewalk, grocery bag twisting in her numb fingers as the storm hurled needles into her face. Downriver, where the old bridge had collapsed last summer and never been repaired, headlights spun like drowning stars. A black sedan had been snatched off the road and was wedged against the broken guardrail, nose down, taillights bleeding red into the flood. The river had risen over the embankment and turned the street into a channel of brown, churning force that ate anything left in its path. Another scream. A child. Arya ran before her mind could argue. Cans tumbled from the bag and clattered into the gutter. She jumped the curb, shoes vanishing in icy water that punched her shins and tried to take her legs out from under her. The current hammered at her knees. She clung to a rusted signpost, gasped a breath, and pushed forward, teeth chattering as the river climbed to her thighs. The sedan lurched as the guardrail gave another inch. Inside the car, behind a film of glass streaked by rain and mud, a small face pressed to the window. Dark hair slicked across a forehead. Tiny fists beat at the glass. Water swirled inside the cabin, climbing the door seams, a slow and merciless tide. Arya reached the rear quarter panel and grabbed it, boots sliding across submerged asphalt. The metal was slick and cold enough to burn. The window wiper dragged across the windshield in a useless arc. The horn gave a strangled bleat and fell silent. Arya shouted that it would be all right, but the storm shredded the words. The little girl's mouth shaped a silent cry. Arya braced her shoulder against the rear door and pulled the handle. It did not move. She pulled again until her palm slipped off the chrome. The car shifted and creaked. The guardrail screamed as another bolt sheared away and vanished into the water. Arya slapped the glass with her palm, then with the heel of her fist. The pain did not even quiver. She looked around for anything heavy enough to shatter tempered glass. The sidewalk was a brown river. The nearest thing was a broken length of rebar jutting from a slab of fallen concrete 5 feet away, across water that wanted to tear her down and sweep her into the black mouth of the culvert. Arya let go of the car and waded sideways, every step a fight. The current caught her thigh and spun her, slamming her hip into the slab. Pain flashed white, but she caught the rebar, yanked it free, and clawed her way back to the door, cursing at the storm, at the city, at fate. She brought the rebar down near the corner of the window where glass is weakest. The first blow rang like struck bells. The second cracked a spider web into the pane. The third shattered it into glittering teeth. Water vomited out, muddy and cold, knocking the bar from her hand. Arya shoved her arm through the jagged frame and found a shoulder slick with soaked fabric. The child coughed and choked. The seatbelt held fast across a tiny chest. Arya reached for the buckle and her fingers slipped off. She forced the belt down, grinding it across her knuckles until the latch relented and snapped free. She hooked her hands under the girl's arms and pulled. The child wedged at the door frame. Broken glass bit Arya's forearm. She pulled again, ignoring the cut that opened, and the warm blood the river stole. The girl slid free with a sob that sounded like a prayer breaking. The car moaned and tipped another inch toward the river. Arya tucked the child under her arm and pushed backward. The current surged and caught them both, ripping at Arya's legs, trying to fold her left knee into the water. For a panicked heartbeat, she felt the ground disappear and the river take them, and she knew if they fell it would end there in the black throat of the culvert. She lunged and found the curb with her heel. She threw her weight back, clawed the rough concrete with her free hand, and hauled them both onto the sidewalk, where the water was only angry instead of lethal. The sedan finally lost its argument with the guardrail and slid away. For a suspended second, it hung, nose down, lights bright as eyes. Then the river took it. It vanished into the dark with a sound like a swallowed breath. The little girl screamed. Arya wrapped herself around the small, shaking body and whispered that she was safe, that it was over, that she would not let go. Headlights carved through the rain. Engines growled. Black SUVs rolled out of the storm like animals finding blood. Doors opened in unison. Men stepped out in tailored coats that shed water as if it feared them. Their movements were sharp and synchronized. Not the chaos of good Samaritans, but the rhythm of men who lived by orders. The one in front did not wear a hat, and the rain darkened his hair and the collar of his coat as if the storm itself bent to him. His eyes found the child. The mask on his face cracked. Not much, just enough to show something raw and human under the marble. He kneeled into the water without looking at the stain and reached his arms out. The girl leaped from Arya's hold into his chest with a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh. He held her like every bone in his body had been waiting to do only this. His voice when he spoke the girl's name was low and absolute. Sophia. The child pressed her face into his shoulder and clung. He closed his eyes, breathed once as if he had been underwater for years, and then looked at Arya. The rain had washed the blood from her arm into long pink streaks. Mud clung to her jeans. Her hair stuck to her face in dark ropes. She met his stare and did not look away. She expected gratitude or suspicion or a nod that dismissed her. He did not thank her. He catalogued her. His gaze moved with a precise, unsparing logic, taking in the cut on her forearm, the tremor in her jaw that she refused to let become fear, the way she had placed her body between the river and the child, even after the rescue. He stood with the girl in his arms, and the night felt smaller around him. "You pulled her from the car," he said. His accent was not heavy, but it sharpened certain sounds until they could cut. Arya nodded because her lungs still burned when she tried to speak. She swallowed the taste of river and iron and said yes. One of the men stepped forward with a coat, and the stranger shook his head. He shrugged out of his own and wrapped Sophia in it instead. The coat swallowed the child and made her look even smaller. He handed her gently to a woman with a medic bag who appeared from the back seat of the lead vehicle, then turned back to Arya. "Your name," he said. "Arya Moretti." "Arya," he repeated, as if the word meant something he had been forced to forget. He took a step closer. The storm hissed between them. "You saved my daughter." "I heard her," Arya said. Her voice came back on the third try. No one else was there. "I think this..." Men moved around them with radios and umbrellas and a perimeter only they understood. An ambulance howled somewhere far away. The stranger regarded Arya for a quiet stretch of time that felt like judgment. When he spoke again, the words were not a gift. "You are part of this now." Arya flinched. "I did not ask for that." "No one asks," he said. "The river does not ask before it takes the road. The city does not ask before it forgets your name. You did a thing that cannot be undone. I sees, He lifted his hand. One of the men appeared with a folded white hand towel, the kind that belonged in a private jet, not on a ruined street. The stranger offered it to her himself. Arya took it and pressed it to her bleeding forearm. Heat crept through the cloth, a small shock after the river's bite. "Come," he said. "You will be seen by a doctor, and then you will go home. Tonight you will be allowed to sleep. Tomorrow I will send for you. Now like..." Arya shook her head, the storm suddenly loud in the spaces behind her eyes. "I do not owe you anything." The faintest blade of a smile cut his mouth. "That is not true. You owe me. Because every enemy I have now knows your face. The man who sent that car into the water will learn your name by morning. He will not punish you for saving a child. He will punish you for touching what belongs to me." Arya felt cold that had nothing to do with the river. She looked past him, to Sophia in the medic's arms. The little girl's eyes were huge and wet and fixed on Arya, as if the thin thread holding her to this world still ran through the woman who had pulled her from it. Arya lifted a hand and Sophia lifted hers back, a mirror across 3 feet and an ocean of fear. The stranger followed the line of that small gesture. He inclined his head once, as if confirming something to himself. "My name is Lorenzo De Luca," he said. "Remember it. When you hear the knock, open the door." He turned away then, issuing orders that cut through the rain like clean glass, and the night folded to his will. A man guided Arya toward a waiting car with heated leather seats that felt wrong against river-wet clothes. As the door closed, she looked through the window one last time. Lorenzo stood in the storm with his daughter in his arms, a titan holding a fragile world, and for the first time Arya understood that she had stepped into a current stronger than any river. It would pull, it would drag, it would demand. She did not know if she would drown or learn to breathe under it. The car slid into the dark. The siren drew near. Behind them, the flood swallowed the place where the sedan had been. Ahead, a road unwound that Arya had never wanted and could no longer refuse. In the reflection of the glass, her eyes looked like a stranger's. She laid her head back and closed them. Just for a moment, and the only thing she saw was a little hand against a rain-streaked window, trusting her to break the world and pull her into the light. The hospital smelled like bleach, old fear, and the metallic echo of rain. Arya Moretti sat in a stiff plastic chair, her arm wrapped in fresh gauze, a blanket draped around her shoulders that did nothing to stop the shivering. Machines hummed behind thin curtains, nurses whispered in corridors, and outside, the storm still clawed at the city like it was trying to drown the night itself. She stared at her hands, swollen and raw from fighting the river, and tried to convince herself that it had all been an accident, an impossible coincidence. She had seen a car, heard a scream, and done what anyone would have done. Nothing more, nothing heroic, nothing that should have consequences. But she could still feel it. The pressure of small fingers gripping her sleeve, the way the girl's heartbeat had trembled against her chest. Sophia. The name felt fragile in her thoughts, a word too delicate for the world that had exploded around it. The door opened with a slow, deliberate sound. Two men in dark suits entered first, scanning the corners of the room like soldiers expecting a bomb. They did not speak, did not glance at her, simply took positions, one by the door, the other near the window. A chill spread through the sterile air before the third figure appeared. Lorenzo De Luca. He didn't walk so much as move through the room like gravity had shifted around him. The black coat was gone, replaced by a tailored charcoal suit, but the same storm clung to him. His gaze swept over Arya, one precise, assessing glance that carried more weight than a dozen questions. You refused the money. His voice was low, controlled, but sharp enough to draw blood. Arya's throat tightened. I didn't save her for money. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. Most people would have taken it. I'm not most people. Silence stretched between them, heavy and unbroken. Lorenzo took a slow step closer, his shoes barely whispering against the tile. You should have taken it, he said softly. It would have been easier for both of us. Esmers, Arya met his gaze and forced her voice not to shake. I don't want your charity. His jaw flexed once, a muscle moving beneath the calm mask. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket and placed it on the small metal table beside her. A folded piece of paper. Arya stared at it but didn't touch. Do you know what this is? He asked. No. It's your life. She frowned. What are you talking about? He unfolded the paper and her breath stopped. In elegant black ink, she saw her name. Her address, notes in precise handwriting, her part-time job at the corner cafe, her mother's illness, the rent she struggled to pay, the overdue bills from the pharmacy that refused credit. Her stomach dropped. How? I make it my business to know who touches my world, he interrupted. The calm in his tone more dangerous than anger. You live on the south side in a building that should have been condemned 5 years ago. Your landlord is waiting for the chance to throw you out. 2 nights ago, a man named Vincent Hale visited you about your father's debt. Her fingers went cold. That's not possible. That debt was years ago. It's gone. Lorenzo's eyes hardened. Vincent doesn't collect for banks. He collects for Marcus Valente. The name was unfamiliar, but the way he said it made her pulse quicken. Who is that? An enemy, Lorenzo said simply. A man who wants to see me burn, which means when he sends someone to your door, he isn't after money, he's after me. This is one? Arya's voice shrank to a whisper. I don't understand. Why would... Because you pulled my daughter out of that car. The words landed like a stone in her chest. The The hospital room suddenly felt too small, too bright. Lorenzo leaned forward, resting his hands on the back of the chair across from her. His voice lowered, quieter, but no less sharp. When you saved Sophia, you didn't just step into a river. You stepped into a war. Marcus knows your face. He will use you to reach me. And I will not allow that. Arya swallowed hard. I don't want any of this. Want has nothing to do with it. His tone softened, not with kindness, but with certainty. You saved my daughter. That binds us. I didn't agree to anything. You don't need to, he said. The world already did it for you. He straightened, buttoned his jacket, and turned toward the door. You will go home for now. But when my men come for you, you will come with them. No arguments, no hesitation. I is A. She stood quickly. And if I say no? He stopped, one hand on the doorframe. Then Marcus will find you first. And when he does, he will make you wish you had said yes. The words stole the air from the room. Arya wanted to scream that he was wrong, that this wasn't her fight, that she didn't believe in his shadow world of power and blood, but the image of the black sedan sinking beneath the current flashed through her mind. The sound of Sophia's scream, the way those men had moved, silent, efficient, lethal. He wasn't wrong. Lorenzo looked back once more. Sleep while you can, Arya Moretti. You won't have peace again until I say so. Then he was gone, leaving only silence and the echo of his name in the air like the crack of thunder fading over the city. Outside, rain streaked down the hospital windows, tracing crooked paths of light. Arya stared at them until the room blurred. She thought of her mother asleep in their tiny apartment, unaware that her daughter had just been claimed by a man whose world could erase them both. When the clock on the wall struck midnight, she rose. Her discharge papers waited on the counter. The nurse gave her a tired smile and a warning to rest. Arya nodded, wrapped the thin hospital coat tighter, and stepped into the storm. The city had that washed-out stillness that comes after disaster. Streetlights glowed through mist. Sirens moaned somewhere far off. Water still pooled around the curbs, carrying cigarette butts and broken branches toward the drains. Her apartment building looked smaller than usual, its bricks dark with rain, its windows like hollow eyes. She unlocked the door quietly, hoping not to wake her mother. Inside, the warmth was fragile. The smell of chamomile and medicine faint under the damp air. Her mother stirred on the couch. Arya, you're late. I'm fine, Mama. Go back to sleep. It's us. She kissed her mother's forehead, made tea, and tried to steady her shaking hands. The river's roar still lived in her ears. She kept seeing those eyes, Lorenzo's eyes, watching her through the storm, like he had already decided something about her fate. The knock came just after midnight. 3 sharp, even raps. Arya froze, spoon halfway to the cup. She turned toward the door, heart pounding. Outside, through the narrow blinds, headlights gleamed sleek, black, unfamiliar. Her mother's voice drifted from the couch. Who is it? No one, Mama, Arya whispered. She took a step toward the door, her pulse hammering so loud it drowned the rain. Another knock, the same rhythm command, not request. Arya's hand trembled as she reached for the handle. When she opened the door, the man standing there didn't bother with greetings. He wore the same kind of suit as the ones in the hospital. His eyes were hidden behind dark glasses despite the night. The boss is waiting, he said. Arya's throat went dry. I told him, I'm not... He cut her off. He wasn't asking. Behind him, a black Maserati idled, headlights slicing the darkness. And in that instant, Arya understood the river had never let her go. It had only changed shape. She looked back at her mother, sleeping softly under the thin blanket, then stepped outside into the rain. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded far too much like the end of freedom. The man opened the car door without a word. Arya slid into the back seat. The leather was cold, the silence colder. As the car pulled away from the crumbling street toward the distant glow of wealth and danger, she pressed her palm to the window, watching the rain streak past. She had saved a child, and in doing so, had given herself to the storm. The iron gates opened without a sound, parting like jaws before the approaching car. The driveway stretched on for what felt like a mile, bordered by cypress trees that swayed in the wind like silent sentinels. Arya sat rigid in the back seat of the Maserati, her fingers twisted in the fabric of her jeans, her reflection flickering across the rain-streaked glass. Every turn of the tires carried her farther from the world. She knew the cracked pavement of her neighborhood, the hum of cheap streetlights, the small life she had scraped together piece by piece. Now she was driving straight into another world, one built on marble and secrets. When the car stopped, the driver opened her door and motioned for her to step out. She hesitated on the edge of the gravel, rain dripping from her hair, eyes rising to the mansion that towered before her. The house was not just large, it was monumental, carved from pale stone and crowned with terraces. Light glowed from tall arched windows, but it was not a welcoming glow. It was the kind of light meant to expose, to warn. The front doors opened and warmth spilled into the night. A woman in a dark uniform waited, expression neutral. "Miss Moretti," she said softly. "This way." Inside, the air smelled of polished wood, expensive perfume, and distance. The floors gleamed under chandeliers that looked like captured constellations. Portraits of severe men lined the hallway, each framed in gold, each gaze heavy with judgment. Arya's wet shoes squeaked on marble, a sound that felt too loud for such a place. They led her into a vast study lined with bookshelves and heavy curtains. A fire burned low in the hearth, throwing long shadows across the floor. And there, standing with his back to her, was Lorenzo De Luca. He turned at the sound of her steps. No coat this time, no storm. Only a man who seemed carved from stillness. His dark hair was damp, his shirt open at the collar, but the composure remained unbroken. "You came," he said. It was not a question. Arya forced her voice to steady. "I didn't have a choice." "There is always a choice." He motioned to a chair across from his desk. "Sit." She stayed standing. "Why am I here?" Lorenzo studied her in silence, the firelight catching the hard lines of his face. "Because my daughter will not sleep without you. Because she calls for you in her dreams." Arya blinked. "Sophia?" A soft patter of footsteps interrupted them. From a door behind the desk, a small figure appeared, barefoot and wrapped in a blanket. Sophia's dark hair clung to her cheeks. The moment she saw Arya, she ran across the room, clutching the blanket to her chest. "You came," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I told Daddy you would." Arya knelt instinctively and opened her arms. The child buried herself there, shaking. Arya felt the tiny heartbeat against her chest, and something inside her softened, even as fear coiled deeper around her ribs. "She needs time," Arya said quietly. "She's been through something terrible." Lorenzo's gaze never left them. "She needs more than time. She needs someone she trusts." "I can't stay here," Arya said. "I have a mother at home, a life." He cut her off with a gesture. "Your mother's rent has been paid for the next year. Her medication will arrive every week without fail. You will receive a stipend that makes your old salary look like pocket change. All you have to do is stay." The words were delivered calmly, almost kindly, but they landed like a lock sliding into place. Arya's throat tightened. That sounds less like an offer and more like ownership. Lorenzo leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "Call it protection, if it helps you sleep." "I don't need your protection." "Yes," he said softly. "You do." "Oh." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Arya looked down at Sophia, who clung tighter to her, unwilling to let go. The girl's eyes were wide and pleading, and in them Arya saw the same fear she had seen through the car window, pure, wordless terror. She lifted her gaze to Lorenzo. "And if I refuse?" He met her eyes without blinking. "Then you risk her life. And yours." The bluntness hit harder than any threat. Arya stood, keeping Sophia's small hand in hers. "I'm not a servant." "No," Lorenzo said. "You're something far more dangerous." "What does that mean?" "It means you stepped into fire and didn't burn. That makes men like Marcus Valente curious. He will come for what he cannot understand. If you stay here, I can control that. If you leave, I cannot. The name sent a chill through her. The man who had sent that car into the river. The man Lorenzo called his enemy. Sophia tugged at Arya's sleeve. Please don't go. Arya looked at her, then at the man who ruled this house with quiet menace. His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, an echo of fear, maybe even hope. Finally, she nodded once. I'll stay for her. Lorenzo inclined his head. That's all I ask. But Arya could hear what he did not say. For now. A maid appeared and guided her down another hallway, past guards who stood like statues, past rooms so large they swallowed sound. They stopped at a door near the end of a corridor overlooking the gardens. This will be your room, the maid said. If you need anything, ring the bell by the bed. When Arya stepped inside, she almost forgot to breathe. The room was beautiful, too beautiful. A canopy bed dressed in white linen, gilded mirrors. A balcony with French doors that opened onto the dark sweep of the city below. Yet the luxury felt cold, like a museum display behind glass. She stood by the window for a long time after the maid left, watching the lights shimmer on wet marble paths. Somewhere in the house, a piano began to play a soft, haunting melody that sounded like grief turned into sound. Her mind drifted to her mother, alone in their small apartment, unaware that her daughter was now trapped in a palace built on power. The door creaked. Arya turned to find Sophia standing in the doorway, clutching her stuffed bear. Can I stay with you tonight? The girl asked. I don't like the dark anymore. Arya's chest tightened. She smiled faintly and pulled back the blanket. Of course. Sophia climbed into bed, curling close until her breathing evened. Arya lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of guards' footsteps echoing through marble halls. When she finally slipped from the bed and stepped into the corridor, the air was colder. She wandered aimlessly until she reached a pair of half-open doors. Inside, she saw him again. Lorenzo sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled to his forearms. A glass of untouched whiskey beside him. Two men stood across the table, pointing at papers covered in maps and symbols. Their voices were low, speaking in Italian too fast for her to follow, but she understood the tone orders, danger, control. Then Lorenzo looked up. Their eyes met. The men fell silent instantly. Leave us, he said. They hesitated only long enough to gather the papers before disappearing into the corridor. Arya stood frozen at the threshold. I didn't mean to intrude. You already did. She stepped inside, defiant despite the pounding of her heart. You keep saying I'm part of this world now, then stop treating me like a stranger. A faint, unreadable smile touched his mouth. You're brave, or foolish. Sometimes they look the same. I'm neither, she said. I just don't like cages no matter how golden they are. Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, studying her as though she were a puzzle he intended to solve. Then learn quickly. This house is not a cage. It is a fortress. Everything inside it is worth killing for. Even a child? His eyes darkened. Especially a child. The words chilled her to the bone. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Arya. She looked back. For what it's worth, he said quietly. Sophia smiled tonight. She hasn't done that since her mother died. Arya hesitated. The firelight painted him in gold and shadow, the outline of a man both powerful and broken. She wanted to hate him for dragging her into his world, but part of her saw the truth. He never said aloud. He was terrified of losing what little remained. When she finally returned to her room, dawn was beginning to bleed across the horizon. Sophia still slept soundly, small and peaceful against the vastness of the bed. Arya stood by the window, watching the first light spill over the DeLuca estate. The walls gleamed like polished bone. Somewhere deep in the house, a door locked with a heavy click that echoed through the halls. And in that moment, she understood the gates had not opened to welcome her. They had closed to keep her inside. The days that followed blurred together like rain against glass. The DeLuca mansion existed in a rhythm that felt foreign to Arya. Breakfasts served by silent staff, guards stationed at every corner, corridors that seemed to listen when she walked through them. Everything gleamed, from the marble floors to the silver trays, yet the air was always heavy, as though the house itself held its breath. Arya stayed close to Sophia. The child shadowed her everywhere, clinging to her hand as if letting go meant drowning again. They read picture books in the conservatory, painted clumsy watercolors on the sunlit veranda, and walked the long hallways that smelled faintly of jasmine and gun oil. At night, Sophia slept curled against Arya's side, the little bear tucked between them. But no matter how peaceful the surface seemed, Arya could feel the tension beneath it, the silence before thunder, the hum of power stretched thin. Lorenzo was never far. He moved through the house like a ghost made of precision and purpose, his presence filling the air long before his footsteps reached a doorway. When he entered a room, people straightened. When he spoke, silence followed. But when he looked at Arya, something flickered behind his composure, a quiet war he never voiced. He had given her safety, food, comfort, things she had not known in years, yet every kindness carried an invisible chain. One morning, as sunlight cut through the tall windows, Arya and Sophia sat at a table covered in crayons and unfinished drawings. The rain had returned, soft and rhythmic, against the glass ceiling of the conservatory. "Do you miss your mother?" Sophia asked suddenly, her voice so small it barely reached above the sound of rain. Arya blinked, surprised. "Every day." Sophia's crayon paused mid-stroke. "Daddy says Mama's in heaven, but I don't think she is. I think she's hiding." Arya frowned. "Why do you think that?" The little girl looked up, eyes too old for her age. "Because of the man in the raincoat." A chill ran through Arya. "What? Man?" "The one who said, 'Daddy can't protect me forever.'" Sophia's lip trembled. "He came before the flood." Before Arya could answer, the sound of hurried footsteps broke through the quiet. A guard appeared in the doorway, his earpiece crackling. His face was pale. "Signor De Luca, perimeter breach. East wall." The words barely landed before Lorenzo's voice boomed from the hall. "Lock down the north wing. Move." Chaos unfurled in a heartbeat. Guards sprinted through corridors, radios flaring with coded commands. Arya rose instinctively, pulling Sophia behind her. The little girl began to cry. "What's happening?" Arya demanded. The guard's hand went to his weapon. "Stay inside. Do not move until I return." He vanished before she could ask more. The rain intensified, pounding the glass ceiling in waves. Thunder rolled over the hills. Arya crouched, wrapping Sophia in her arms. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're safe here." But she didn't believe it. Through the rain, a shadow moved beyond the glass garden walls, a tall figure in a long coat, his movements deliberate, unhurried. Even through the distortion of water, Arya could feel his gaze settle on them, sharp as a blade. A cold voice carried through the storm, smooth and mocking. "Beautiful house you've built, Lorenzo. Shame it can't keep what's yours safe." The words struck like lightning. Arya tightened her hold on Sophia. The child buried her face against her chest, trembling. Guards shouted orders in Italian, racing toward the outer doors. Arya caught a glimpse of the figure stepping back into the rain, his grin faint and cruel. Then he was gone, swallowed by the storm as quickly as he had appeared. The glass doors burst open moments later. Lorenzo strode in, his coat soaked, water dripping from his hair. His expression was thunder itself. "Sophia," he called. "Daddy!" The little girl bolted from Arya's arms, running into his. He dropped to one knee, clutching her tight, his hands shaking despite the iron mask he always wore. "She's fine," Arya said quickly. He didn't get close. Lorenzo looked up. For a fraction of a second, she saw fear in his eyes, real, unguarded fear. Then it vanished, replaced by cold control. "Who?" she asked. "Who was that man?" "Marcus Valente," he said, his voice low and sharp. "The man who killed my wife. The man who sent that car into the river." Arya's blood turned to ice. "He was here?" "He wanted me to see him. To know he can reach this house whenever he pleases." Lorenzo rose, still holding his daughter. "He wanted to remind me that nothing I build can keep him out." Sophia clung to his collar. "He said you can't protect me forever." Lorenzo closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. He's wrong. When he opened them again, his gaze found Arya. The softness was gone. In its place was something like steel. You kept her safe again, he said. I didn't do anything, she protested. You did more than you think. He turned to one of his men. Double the guards. I want eyes on every gate, every wall, every shadow. If a leaf moves, I want to know who touched it. Yes, signore. It's... Arya stood there, trembling, her heart still hammering. The air smelled of gun oil and rain. She wanted to scream at him for dragging her into this world, for pretending protection was something you could buy with soldiers and stone. But when she looked at Sophia's face, tear-streaked, fragile, she couldn't. Instead, she whispered, He'll come back. Lorenzo's gaze locked on hers. I know. Later that night, the mansion was quiet again. Too quiet. Sophia finally fell asleep, clutching Arya's hand so tightly her fingers ached. Arya lay beside her, staring at the ceiling. Every sound, every creak, every whisper of wind felt like danger waiting to be named. When she couldn't stand it anymore, she slipped from the bed and padded down the hall. The doors to the study were open, the room dim except for the glow of the fireplace. Lorenzo stood at the window, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. You should be resting, he said without turning. So should you, Arya answered. He set the glass down. Men like Marcus don't sleep. That means I can't either. She stepped closer, the fire painting her in gold and shadow. Sophia told me about the man in the raincoat. You knew he was watching her, didn't you? I suspected, Lorenzo said quietly, but suspicion isn't proof. Now I have proof. Arya's voice trembled. And what will you do? What I must. You'll kill him. His silence was answer enough. Arya's breath came out sharp. That's not protection, Lorenzo. That's revenge. He turned then, and for once the calm broke. You think I don't know the difference. He murdered my wife. He tried to drown my daughter. If I don't end him, he will end us. Us? She repeated. When did I become part of this? When you pulled Sophia from the river, he said, and when she called for you instead of her mother. The words hit like thunder. Arya shook her head. I didn't ask for this. Neither did I. His tone softened, but the weight of it filled the room. But here we are. He stepped closer, the scent of rain still clinging to him. You want to protect her, then trust me. I don't trust men who build cages and call them fortresses. Then learn, he said, because the walls around you now are all that stand between her and the man who would tear her apart. For a long moment, they stood in silence, two storms meeting in the same dark sky. Then Lorenzo turned away, his reflection fractured in the window. Get some sleep, Arya. Tomorrow we begin again. She left without another word, her pulse pounding in her ears. When she reached her room, she found Sophia still asleep, breathing softly under the glow of the night lamp. Arya sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's cheek. Outside, thunder rumbled one last time before fading into silence. But Arya knew the truth. The storm was far from over. Marcus Valente had found them once. He would find them again. And next time, he wouldn't come just to make threats. Morning broke over the DeLuca estate like a false promise. Sunlight spilled across the marble floors, catching on crystal chandeliers and polished mirrors, but the warmth didn't reach the people who lived there. Guards moved through the halls with quiet urgency. Every shadow seemed to hold an echo of the man who had dared to breach their walls. Arya Moretti stood at the window of Sophia's room, watching the garden below. The security detail had doubled overnight. Men in suits patrolled the perimeter, their weapons barely hidden beneath their coats. The air buzzed with the tension of soldiers waiting for another war. Behind her, Sophia played silently with her crayons, drawing houses and flowers that looked like fragile dreams. Arya smiled faintly at the sight, but her heart was heavy. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of the man in the raincoat, the cold confidence in his voice. Marcus Valente. Even his name sounded like poison. A soft knock broke her thoughts. When she opened the door, Lorenzo De Luca stood there, dressed in a dark suit that looked like armor. His presence filled the doorway. "She's awake," Arya said, her voice careful. Lorenzo nodded once, then stepped into the room. His gaze softened when it landed on Sofia, who turned and smiled timidly. "Buongiorno, mia piccola," he said, kneeling to brush her hair from her face. "Good morning, Daddy." Her voice was small, but brighter than it had been in days. Arya watched the exchange from a distance, unsure what to do with the ache that rose in her chest. She had never seen this side of him before, the tenderness that slipped through when he thought no one else was watching. Sofia handed him a piece of paper, a drawing of 3 figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sundae. "This is us," she said. Lorenzo looked down at the crayon family, his expression unreadable. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Arya turned away, pretending to busy herself with the curtains. After Sofia went to the kitchen with her tutor, Lorenzo lingered. "Walk with me," he said quietly. Arya hesitated. "Why?" "Because we need to talk somewhere no one can listen." The garden was washed in pale light, the air sharp with the scent of rain-soaked roses. Lorenzo led her down a stone path bordered by trimmed hedges and marble statues that seemed to watch their every move. "You're angry," he said finally. "I'm trapped," she corrected. "There's a difference." He glanced at her, the faintest flicker of a smile crossing his mouth. "You think I'm the one holding you prisoner." "Isn't it obvious?" she snapped. "Your men follow me like shadows. Every door locks from the outside. I can't leave." "That's not protection, Lorenzo. That's control." "What?" He stopped walking and faced her fully. "You are alive because of that control." "I'm alive because I pulled your daughter from a river," she shot back. "Don't twist that into obedience." His eyes hardened. "You think I enjoy this? You think I want to lock you behind gates? Every decision I make is to keep you and Sofia breathing. Marcus doesn't stop. He doesn't forgive. The moment you walk out of those gates, you become leverage." Arya stepped closer, her anger shaking. "Maybe the problem isn't Marcus. Maybe it's you. Maybe this empire of fear you've built is the reason he keeps coming." The air between them thickened. For the first time, his composure cracked. "You have no idea what I've done to keep that man from destroying my family." "No," she said softly. "But I think it's destroying you anyway." Lorenzo turned away, hands clenched behind his back. "You sound like her." "Who?" "My wife." His voice lowered almost to a whisper. "Gianna used to tell me the same thing, that every war I fought stole a piece of me, that someday there would be nothing left to give." Arya's anger faltered. She was right, wasn't she? He didn't answer, but the silence was enough. They walked the rest of the path without speaking. When they reached the fountain, Lorenzo stopped again, his reflection rippling in the water. "I can't lose Sofia," he said. "She's all I have left." Arya met his gaze. "Then stop fighting ghosts. She doesn't need an empire. She needs a father." Something flickered in his expression, pain, guilt, maybe both. "You speak like you've known me your whole life." "No," Arya said quietly. "I just know what it's like to lose everything and still keep fighting." They stood there, motionless, as the wind shifted and sent ripples across the fountain. Back inside, the mansion had changed. It was subtle, but Arya felt it the way the staff glanced at her now, with a mix of respect and unease, the way guards lowered their eyes when she passed. Word had spread that she had faced Marcus Valente and lived. In a house built on power, survival was its own kind of legend. That night, Sofia begged Arya to stay with her again. The little girl clung to her arm until sleep finally claimed her. Arya sat beside the bed, brushing a strand of hair from the child's face. She looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos that surrounded them. But Arya couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed every word Lorenzo had said. She rose quietly and made her way to the study. The door was ajar, the fire inside burning low. Lorenzo sat behind his desk, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows, maps and documents lay scattered across the table. He didn't look up when she entered. "You shouldn't be here," he said without turning. "You keep saying that," she replied, "but you never mean it." He exhaled through his nose, a sound half between annoyance and amusement. You really don't know when to stop talking. I'm not afraid of you, Lorenzo. He finally looked up, and the faint smirk that touched his lips didn't reach his eyes. You should be. Arya crossed her arms. You think fear makes people loyal, but it doesn't. It just makes them quiet. Lorenzo stood, the movement fluid, controlled. He circled the desk, closing the distance between them. And what makes you loyal, Arya Moretti? She didn't back away. The truth. His brow arched slightly. You think there's truth in this house? There's truth in you, she said. You just bury it under power. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, sharp and dangerous. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed low, rough, almost human. You're reckless. Or maybe I just don't care what you are, she countered. The laughter faded, but the trace of it lingered in his eyes. Most people who talk to me like that end up disappearing. Then I guess I'm not most people. He studied her, the air between them shifting, thick with something unspoken. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. You're wrong about fear. You know, it doesn't just make people quiet. It makes them careful, and careful people survive. Then teach Sophia to be careful, Arya said. Not afraid. Her words landed, and for once, Lorenzo had no reply. She turned to leave, her pulse still racing, but before she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Arya. She looked back. For what it's worth, he said, his tone low and rough, you make this house feel alive again. Arya didn't answer. She just stood there for a long moment, the firelight flickering between them, and then she walked out into the dark corridor. Behind her, Lorenzo stayed by the fire, staring into the flames like a man seeing his own reflection for the first time. He had built his world from stone and fear, but now cracks had begun to show, and in those cracks, something dangerous was growing. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't regret. It was hope. The rain had stopped, but the air outside the DeLuca estate still smelled of thunder. The night stretched vast and brittle, moonlight glinting off the wet marble like spilled mercury. Inside, silence lay over the house like a warning. The guards were gone from the main hall, posted at the gates instead. The storm had passed, but the memory of it clung to the walls, thick as smoke. Arya Moretti sat by the fire in the sitting room, unable to sleep. The flames danced and hissed softly, casting long gold streaks across the floor. She had tried to close her eyes, but her mind refused to quiet. Every time she drifted near sleep, she saw Sophia's frightened face, the shadow of Marcus Valente at the glass, the way Lorenzo's voice had broken for the first time when he swore to keep them safe. She didn't understand him, not fully. He was a paradox made of armor and scars, ruthless in one breath, almost human in the next. Every word he spoke felt like a test, every look like a challenge. And yet, despite everything he had done, something about him drew her closer instead of driving her away. The door creaked open behind her. She turned. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, his hair damp, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked different without the suit jacket, without the mask of command. Tired, uncertain, almost real. You're awake, he said. So are you. I could say I was working, he said, walking slowly toward the fire, but that would be a lie. Arya's voice softened. Then why are you awake? He stopped across from her, the firelight catching the sharp planes of his face. Because I keep seeing that night. The flood? He nodded. Sophia's face through the glass. The car sinking. I didn't get there in time. Arya's chest tightened. You couldn't have. Maybe not, he said quietly. But I should have. I should never have let her be in that car. Arya hesitated, unsure if she should speak. Was it Marcus? His jaw tightened. He wanted to remind me that everything I love can be taken. And he succeeded. She studied him, the way his eyes shifted, not with rage this time, but with grief. You said he killed your wife. Lorenzo didn't move for a long time. The fire crackled between them, the light sliding over his hands where they clenched into fists. Finally, he exhaled, the sound low and uneven. Gianna, he said, her name like a confession. She was sunlight, everything I am not, When we met, I was already what you see now, cold, precise, a man who made a living out of fear. She saw something worth saving in me. She was wrong. She loved you, Arya said softly. She did, he admitted. And I loved her in the only way I knew how, by keeping her close and everyone else away. But love inside this life is a weakness. Marcus understood that before I did. He wanted power, and I stood in his way. So he took her from me to prove a point. Arya's voice trembled. How? She was driving home from our villa, Lorenzo said, eyes distant. A truck came out of nowhere. They said it was an accident. It wasn't. Marcus paid the driver to cut her off, then made sure the report vanished. For years, I pretended it was fate. That lie kept me alive. Arya's heart ached at the quiet devastation in his voice. And Sophia? She was 5, he said. She doesn't remember much. I told her her mother went to heaven because I couldn't bear to say that she died because of me. Arya rose slowly from her chair, the blanket sliding off her shoulders. She crossed the room until she stood beside him. The firelight caught the glint of moisture at the corner of his eye. He didn't hide it this time. You blame yourself, she said. I blame the man who made me this, he answered. But yes, every day. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick with the kind of truth that stripped everything bare. Finally, Arya said, I don't hate you, Lorenzo. He looked at her, startled. You should. I hate what you've done, she said, her voice steady. The violence, the fear, the way you make the world bend around you. But I don't hate you, because beneath all of that, there's a man who still looks for forgiveness, even if he'll never admit it. His lips parted, but no words came out. Arya took a breath, forcing herself to keep speaking. You think love makes you weak, but it's the only reason you're still fighting. He stared at her like she had spoken something no one had dared say aloud before. Arya, he said, her name low and rough. You don't know what you're saying. And I know exactly what I'm saying, she whispered. You're not the monster Marcus wants you to believe you are. Something broke in his expression. The mask slipped, the control cracked, and for a moment she saw the man Gianna must have loved, the man buried under years of blood and silence. He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from Arya's face. His hand was warm, steady, calloused. The touch made her heart stutter. I shouldn't, he murmured. Then don't, she said, but her voice betrayed her, softer than she meant it to be. His eyes lingered on her lips, then lifted back to her gaze. You have no idea what it means to care for someone in my world. Then show me. The air between them changed, the fire popped, sparks rising like stars. For one heartbeat, the distance vanished. His hand rested against her cheek, his thumb brushing the skin just below her eye. Then the moment shattered. The door burst open. A guard stood there, breathless, voice taut with urgency. Signor, we have movement. Marcus's men were spotted near the docks. Lorenzo dropped his hand instantly, his expression slamming back into control. Mobilize everyone. No one moves without my order. Yes, Signor. When the door closed again, the silence that followed was heavier than before. Arya took a step back, her pulse still racing. You're going after him. I have to. And so, why? He turned toward her, and the softness from a moment ago was gone. Because this doesn't end until one of us is dead. She shook her head. You just told me love made you fight. Don't let hate take that away. It's not hate anymore, he said. It's survival. Arya's voice cracked. And what about Sophia? What happens to her if you don't come back? He hesitated. That was the first sign of doubt she had seen in him all night. I'll come back, he said finally, though it sounded more like a promise to himself than to her. She stepped closer. Then promise me one thing. What? That when this is over, if you survive, you'll stop running toward war. You'll stop letting it define who you are. His jaw tightened. You're asking me to do the impossible. No, she said softly. I'm asking you to try. For a moment, the mask cracked again. He nodded once. I'll try. He brushed past her and started toward the door. Before he stepped through it, he looked back. Arya, he said, his voice quieter now, you remind me of her, not in how you look, in the way you refuse to be afraid. Her chest ached at the words. Maybe you need someone who isn't. Lorenzo gave a faint, bitter smile. Maybe. Then he was gone, leaving the echo of his footsteps fading down the marble corridor. Arya stood alone by the fire, the air still charged with everything they hadn't said. Outside, thunder rumbled again in the distance, a storm reborn, waiting to strike. She wrapped her arms around herself and whispered to the empty room, "Be careful, Lorenzo." But she knew he wouldn't be. Men like him didn't fear bullets or death. They feared what came after the moment when there was nothing left to fight for. And somewhere deep inside her, Arya prayed that when that moment came, he would still choose life. The chandeliers of the Grand Verona Hotel gleamed like captured stars. Every inch of the ballroom glittered polished marble, champagne fountains, silk gowns that shimmered beneath golden light. The air smelled of perfume and power, but beneath the beauty, tension moved like an invisible current. Men in tuxedos spoke in murmurs sharp as knives. Women laughed too loudly. And in the center of it all stood Lorenzo de Luca, the man every eye followed but few dared to meet. Arya Moretti lingered near the edge of the room, half hidden behind a marble pillar. The black gown Maria, Lorenzo's housekeeper, had insisted she wear clung too perfectly to her shape, its open back making her feel exposed in more ways than one. She wasn't supposed to be here. This event, a gala for the De Luca Foundation's charity, was really a gathering of kings without crowns, politicians, bankers, and men who wore sin beneath expensive suits. But Sophia had begged her to come. "Please," the girl had whispered that morning, "I hate these parties. You'll make it better." And so here she was, clutching a flute of untouched champagne, pretending to belong in a room where she was nothing but a shadow. Across the room, Lorenzo was surrounded by allies and enemies dressed the same. He moved with the ease of a man who had conquered the ground beneath his feet, every gesture deliberate, every smile a calculation. Yet when his eyes found Arya across the ballroom, something inside him softened almost imperceptibly. He excused himself from the circle of sharks and crossed to her. The crowd parted in his wake. "You should be with Sophia," he murmured, low enough for only her to hear. "She's upstairs with the nanny," Arya said. "Safe for once." Lorenzo's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. "You don't trust my security? I don't trust your enemies." Andert. He studied her for a moment, as though trying to decide whether she was brave or foolish. "Then stay close to me." Arya's pulse quickened. "Is that a request or an order?" His gaze lingered on her face. "Both." The string quartet in the corner shifted to a slower piece, the melody haunting and low. Around them, guests began to dance. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. Lorenzo offered his hand. "Dance with me." Arya hesitated. "I'm not here to—" "Arya," he interrupted softly, "if you refuse, everyone will notice. If you accept, they'll think we're simply performing. Either way, they will talk. You might as well decide what they say." She exhaled, knowing she'd already lost this battle. Her fingers brushed his and he pulled her gently onto the dance floor. His hand settled at her waist, his touch steady but not possessive. "You've done this before," he said, voice calm. "Once," she murmured, "at a wedding. Before the world went mad." He chuckled quietly, the sound deep in his chest. "It always was mad, you just hadn't seen it yet." They moved together, slow and deliberate. The distance between them dissolved, replaced by something dangerous. The lights above refracted through crystal, painting shifting patterns across his face. For a fleeting heartbeat, Arya forgot the guards, the weapons, the ghosts of the past. She saw only a man who had lost everything and was still standing. Then the world cracked. A flicker of movement caught her eye, too sharp, too purposeful. A waiter crossing the mezzanine, his tray empty, his hand slipping beneath his jacket. Not toward wine, toward steel. "Lorenzo," Arya breathed, her voice tightening. "Gun." He reacted before the word had finished leaving her lips. His hand gripped her arm and shoved her down just as the first shot split the air. Glass exploded from a chandelier, raining shards across the marble. Screams erupted. The music died mid-note. Arya's heart slammed against her ribs as Lorenzo drew his pistol from the holster beneath his jacket. Around them, his men closed ranks, weapons drawn, forming a living wall. "Stay down!" one shouted, covering her. But Arya wasn't thinking about herself. Through the chaos, she scanned the room for the one face that mattered. "Sophia!" "She's upstairs," Lorenzo barked, firing toward the mezzanine. "She's safe." "If not." Arya crawled behind a table as bullets tore through tablecloth and crystal. The air filled with the deafening percussion of gunfire. Panic flooded the room, people screaming, stumbling, heels snapping against marble. She saw movement to her left, a man dressed as staff, reloading behind a toppled buffet. He looked up, eyes locking with hers. His smile was thin, vicious. Arya's gaze darted to the floor. Her hand closed around the heavy silver candlestick that had rolled near her feet. The man raised his gun. She moved first. She rose and swung. The blow connected with a sickening crack. He collapsed instantly, the gun clattering beside him. Her chest heaved, adrenaline flooding her veins. "Arya." She looked up. Lorenzo was there, crossing the chaos toward her, firing as he moved. The world blurred around him, flashes of muzzle light, shouts in Italian, glass raining like snow. By the time he reached her, the gunfire was dying. His men had taken down the attackers, their bodies sprawled across the ballroom floor. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing. Lorenzo grabbed Arya by the shoulders, his eyes sweeping her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her hands still trembled. "I'm fine." "Sophia." "She's safe," he repeated. "You saved me again." "I what?" "You saw the shooter before my men did," he said. "If you hadn't warned me, that bullet would have gone through my chest." I just reacted," she said, her voice shaking. "That reaction kept my daughter from losing both her parents." For a moment, neither spoke. The ballroom smelled of smoke and blood, the marble streaked crimson beneath shattered glass. The guests were gone, evacuated or hiding, leaving behind silence and destruction. Lorenzo's men moved quickly, gathering weapons, dragging the bodies out of sight before the police could arrive. It was a ritual they all knew too well. Lorenzo exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. His suit was torn at the sleeve, streaked with blood that wasn't his. He looked older than he had an hour ago, as though the weight of his world had finally pressed too hard. "Come," he said, offering her his coat. "You need to get out of here." "I can walk." "I didn't say you couldn't," he said quietly. "But you've been standing in gunfire, and my patience for arguments tonight is thin." "Less balk." Arya didn't protest when he draped the coat around her shoulders. It was too large, smelling faintly of cedar and smoke, but it was warm. She clutched it tighter. They left through a side door as the first police sirens reached the street. Lorenzo's men flanked them, their faces blank, their loyalty absolute. Outside, the night air was cold and metallic. In the waiting car, Arya sat beside him in silence as the city lights blurred past. Her hands were still stained with the attacker's blood. She couldn't stop seeing it. The man's eyes, the moment the candlestick hit. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I killed him." Lorenzo turned his head, studying her profile. "He would have killed you. That's the only truth that matters." She shook her head. "You say that like it should make me feel better." "It's not about feeling better," he said. "It's about surviving." The car turned down a private road lined with trees. The DeLuca mansion appeared in the distance, glowing against the darkness like a kingdom built on fire. When they arrived, Lorenzo dismissed his men and led her inside. The house was silent except for the echo of their footsteps. In the study, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Arya didn't drink, but he pressed one into her hand anyway. "It will help with the shaking," he said. She took a small sip, the burn tracing fire down her throat. "You should change," he said quietly. "You're covered in blood." "I don't have anything else to wear." He hesitated, then shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders again. "Now you do." For a moment, they just looked at each other. the firelight flickering between them. You put yourself between a gun and my daughter, he said, his voice rough. Not many would. I didn't think. I know, he interrupted. That's what makes it real. Arya swallowed hard. You keep saying I'm part of this world now, but I don't want to be. His gaze softened, and for once he didn't look like a Dawn, but a man. Neither did I. Once. The silence stretched, warm and dangerous. He stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm. Arya. She looked up at him, her breath catching. What? If I lose you, he said, voice low, there won't be anything left worth fighting for. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The air between them was charged, trembling. Then Sophia's small voice carried from the doorway, sleepy and scared. Daddy? They both turned. The little girl stood there in her pajamas, clutching her bear. Lorenzo crossed the room instantly, kneeling to gather her into his arms. It's all right, Piccola. Everything's fine. Arya watched as he soothed the child, her heart twisting. For all his power, for all his darkness, this was who he truly was. A father who would burn the world just to keep one small soul safe. And for the first time, Arya realized she wasn't standing on the outside anymore. She was part of this, part of them. When Sophia finally fell asleep in his arms, Lorenzo carried her upstairs, leaving Arya alone by the fire. The clock on the mantel ticked softly. She looked at the shattered glass still clinging to his coat, at the faint smear of blood across her hand, and whispered to herself, there's no way back now. Outside, the city slept. Inside, the fire burned on, steady and unyielding, just like the bond that had begun to take root between savior and sinner, light and shadow, blood and glass. The days after the Grand Verona massacre passed in uneasy quiet. The city whispered about the attack, about the bodies that had vanished before the police arrived, the blood scrubbed from marble floors, the powerful men who refused to answer questions. But in the De Luca estate, silence became law. Guards doubled. Gates stayed locked. Sophia was never left alone. Arya Moretti tried to pretend life had returned to normal, though she knew better. The house had become a fortress again, and Lorenzo De Luca was its sleepless general. He disappeared for hours at a time, returning with the smell of rain and gunpowder clinging to him. When he did appear, his expression was carved from stone. The world outside was closing in, and he was holding it back with his bare hands. Arya could feel the shift inside him, a man walking the knife's edge between vengeance and exhaustion. And somewhere deep down, she feared the next fall would take them all. One bright afternoon, the illusion of peace broke. The sun hung low over the gardens, turning the marble fountains gold. Arya sat with Sophia under the shade of the willow, reading aloud from one of the child's books. The girl's laughter, light and fragile, floated on the breeze. For the first time in weeks, Arya felt something close to calm. Sophia pointed to a bird fluttering above them. It's singing, she said. Arya smiled. It's happy you're safe. The child's eyes brightened, and she leaned closer. Do you think Daddy's happy too? Arya hesitated. I think he wants to be. Before Sophia could answer, the world shifted. It started as a sound, a faint click of gravel behind them, too precise to be the wind, too careful to be a servant. Arya turned. A man in a dark coat stood at the edge of the path, half hidden by the hedges. His eyes were cold, his hand already lifting something that glinted in the sunday. Don't scream, he said. Arya's heart stopped. She shoved Sophia behind her. But before she could move again, another figure emerged from the trees, pressing cold steel against her temple. Stay quiet, and you'll live, the voice hissed. Sophia whimpered. Arya tried to twist away, but the man's arm locked around her throat. Panic surged, wild and breathless. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, it was over. The second man yanked Sophia away and shoved her toward a trembling maid who had come running from the terrace. Take the kid, he snarled. Our orders are only for the woman. Arya froze. What? No! A van screeched up from the service road, its tires spraying gravel. In the chaos, Sophia screamed her name. Arya! Arya fought, kicked, clawed, but a blow to the side of her head sent the world spinning. The last thing she saw was the garden falling away, Sophia's small figure shrinking behind the trees as the doors slammed shut. Then darkness. When she woke, her mouth tasted of metal and dust. Her wrists were bound behind her chair, the rope cutting deep into her skin. A single light bulb swung overhead, casting harsh circles on cracked concrete. The air reeked of gasoline. A voice drifted from the shadows. You're awake. Good. Arya lifted her head. Marcus Valente stepped into the light. His suit was immaculate, his smile colder than winter. I was beginning to think you'd sleep through our introduction, he said. Arya's heart hammered. You? Me. Marcus finished smoothly. The man who sent you a little welcome waved down the river. Though I must say you surprised me. I didn't expect anyone to pull the girl out. Especially not someone like you. She glared at him. If you touch Sophia. He laughed softly. Oh, relax. I don't harm children. I'm not a monster. I'm an opportunist. He circled her like a predator, his shoes clicking against the floor. Do you know what I admire about you, Arya Moretti? You did what no one else could, made Lorenzo De Luca bleed. Not with bullets, with something far worse. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do, he said, leaning closer. His breath smelled faintly of wine and cruelty. The mighty Don De Luca has lived untouched for years. But then you show up his daughter's savior, his inconvenient little miracle, and suddenly he's human again. He hesitates. He feels. That's how men like him die. Arya's pulse quickened. You're wrong about him. Am I? Marcus smiled. He's already risked his empire for you once. Do you think he'll stop now? He crouched in front of her, eyes glinting. I don't need to kill him, Arya. I just need him to come for you. Her blood ran cold. Back at the estate, Lorenzo stood in his office, phone pressed to his ear, every muscle in his body coiled tight. The call had come from an untraceable number. Marcus's voice was silk over venom. I believe I have something that belongs to you, he'd said. Where is she? Lorenzo growled. Alive. For now. But let's not waste time, old friend. You've taken a lot from me. Ships, money, respect. I think it's only fair I take something back. What do you want? Everything. Marcus's tone was almost playful. Your ports, your network, your loyalty. Or her life. You have 4 hours. The line went dead. Lorenzo stood motionless, the phone still in his hand. His men watched him, waiting for orders. Get every unit ready, he said finally, his voice low and deadly. We end this tonight. Boss, if we hit his warehouse without backup, we'll lose. I don't care, Lorenzo snapped. He took her. No one argued again. In the warehouse, Marcus poured himself another glass of wine. Do you believe in fate? He asked conversationally. Arya's wrists burned where the rope bit into them. Fate didn't put me here. You did. He smiled. Maybe. But fate is the reason he'll come. And when he does, he'll have to choose his empire or you. Either way, I win. You'll regret this. I regret nothing. He raised his glass. To the things we destroy for love. And the sound of engines cut through the night before he could drink. Marcus paused, head tilting. Then came the first explosion. The world erupted in chaos, gunfire, shouting, the roar of engines. The walls shuddered as a door blew open, filling the room with smoke. Arya flinched, coughing, her heart leaping. Through the haze, dark figures stormed in Lorenzo's men, moving like shadows. Bullets tore through the air. Marcus ducked behind a crate, shouting orders, his smooth composure fracturing. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, framed by smoke and fire. His suit was streaked with dust, his eyes burning with fury. Get her out, he roared. 2 of his men rushed forward, cutting Arya's ropes. She stumbled to her feet, shaking, and then he was there, Lorenzo, grabbing her arm, pulling her against him. The relief on his face was raw, unguarded. Did he hurt you? No, she whispered, but he will if you stay. Not tonight, you know? Behind them, Marcus laughed, even as bullets shredded the air. Look at you, Lorenzo, risking your crown for a girl who doesn't belong to your world. You've already lost. Lorenzo turned, gun in hand, eyes dark as the storm that first bound them. No, Marcus, I'm done losing. He fired. The bullet hit Marcus in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. The laughter stopped. Lorenzo stepped forward, pressing the barrel against Marcus's temple. You'll live, he said, voice quiet. That's the punishment. You'll wake every day knowing you failed. He lowered the gun. Lock him up, alive. His men dragged Marcus away, cursing. Lorenzo turned back to Arya, the fire reflecting in his eyes. It's over. She trembled, her voice breaking. No, Lorenzo, it's only beginning. Hours later, back at the estate, the night was still and heavy. Arya sat on the edge of her bed, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Sophia refused to let go of her hand, clinging to her like she might disappear again. Lorenzo stood by the window, staring into the dark. His knuckles were scraped raw, his suit torn, but his expression was unreadable. You risked everything, Arya said quietly. Your men, your empire, for me. He didn't turn. I would burn it all again. She shook her head. That's what terrifies me. Finally, he faced her, his eyes softer now. You don't understand. There's no life worth keeping without you in it. Arya rose, crossing the room until she stood a breath away from him. Then fight for something else, not revenge, not power, fight for us. He looked at her for a long time, the fire from the hearth reflecting in his gaze. For you, he said, always for you. For the first time since she'd met him, the words didn't sound like a threat, they sounded like a vow. And somewhere deep within her, despite every warning she'd ever believed, Arya knew that vow would either save them or destroy them both. The DeLuca estate was quiet again, but it was not the calm of peace. It was the silence that follows a gunfight, the kind that hums with ghosts. The hallways smelled faintly of smoke. The marble floors gleamed, freshly scrubbed, as if blood could be erased with polish. Outside, the sky hung low and gray, the air heavy with the taste of rain. Arya Moretti stood on the balcony outside her room, staring across the gardens where the roses had begun to bloom again. The world was beautiful, but wrong. Nothing truly beautiful ever survived in Lorenzo DeLuca's world for long. Behind her, the door creaked. You should be resting, came Lorenzo's voice. I could say the same to you, she answered, without turning. He stepped beside her, his presence filling the small space between them. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hands still bandaged from the fight at the warehouse. He had not slept. The faint bruises along his jaw told her everything about the night he'd just endured. I'm fine, he said, the lie too smooth. No, you're not. Lorenzo leaned against the railing, his eyes following the horizon. Marcus is in the cellar, alive, as promised. And he'll stay there until I decide what to do with him. Arya folded her arms. You promised me no more blood. I think it's me. He looked at her then, something flickering behind his calm. I said I would try. You don't end men like Marcus with forgiveness. Then you become him, she said quietly. And all of this, all of Sophia's nightmares, your sleepless nights becomes meaningless. He didn't reply. His silence was the kind that screamed. Arya turned to face him fully. You said you wanted to protect her. That's not protection if you fill her world with more violence. You can't raise a child in war and expect her to believe in peace. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. You think I don't know that? Every choice I make kills something, but if I stop fighting, the whole world eats what's left of us. Then stop feeding it, she said. He stared at her for a long moment, and in that gaze she saw the weight of every battle he had ever fought. The world had taken his wife, his soul, and nearly his daughter. Now it was demanding the last thing he still had, his humanity. I don't know how, he said finally, his voice raw. Then learn, she replied, for Sophia, for yourself, for me. Something changed in his expression. The steel didn't vanish, but it bent. You think I can simply choose peace, Arya? That it's a door I can walk through? It's not a door, she said. It's a vow. The word lingered between them, trembling in the air. Lorenzo looked away, exhaling slowly. When I was young, my father told me that mercy is weakness, that a man who hesitates dies. I built my life on that lesson, and then you appeared, and I started to wonder if he was wrong. He was, she whispered. His gaze met hers again, sharp and searching. If I make this vow, if I choose a different path, there's no going back. The families will see it as weakness. They'll come for me, for us. Arya's heartbeat quickened. Then we faced them, together. Ezer Wes E6. For the first time, the faintest hint of a smile ghosted across his lips, not of amusement, but of awe. You have no idea what that means. I know exactly what it means, she said. It means you stop fighting for power and start fighting for life. Lorenzo's eyes softened. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers before curling around them. His grip was warm, steady, almost reverent. You want a vow? He said quietly. Then hear it. It marred possit. It possit. He took a step closer, until his breath mingled with hers. I swear, on my name and on my blood, that I will not spill another drop for vengeance. If I fight again, it will be for survival. For you, for Sophia, for the chance to build something better than the world that made me. Arya's throat tightened. Lorenzo. He pressed her hand to his chest, where his heartbeat thundered against her palm. Do you feel that? It used to mean nothing. Now it's the only thing that reminds me I'm still alive. She looked up at him, the flickering light of resolve softening her fear. Then don't forget it. He nodded slowly. I won't. For a while, they stood in silence. The wind rustled through the cypress trees. Somewhere inside the house, Sophia's laughter drifted faintly down the hall, a sound fragile and pure. It was the kind of sound neither of them believed they would hear again. Arya turned toward the doorway. She's waiting for you. Lorenzo hesitated. What if she hates what I've done? She won't, Arya said. She only hates being afraid. He followed her inside. In Sophia's room, the little girl was sitting on the floor with her dolls, building a small kingdom from wooden blocks. When she saw her father, her eyes lit up. Daddy! Lorenzo knelt, letting her run into his arms. He held her close, burying his face in her hair. Arya watched as the man who ruled an empire melted into something entirely human. Did you fight again? Sophia asked. Lorenzo froze. No, he said after a moment. Not this time. Good, the girl murmured, her voice muffled against his shirt, because I like when you smile, not when you shout. He closed his eyes, his throat tightening. Arya saw it then, the vow already taking root, not in words, but in the quiet of that embrace. Later that night, when Sophia was asleep, Arya found Lorenzo in the study again. But this time, there were no maps on the desk, no guns, only a single glass of whiskey. Untouched. You didn't go down to the cellar, she said. I won't, he replied. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. She stepped closer, drawn by something unspoken. Then you've already kept your promise. He looked up at her, the firelight softening his features. You've changed everything, Arya. She shook her head. You changed yourself. I just reminded you how. He stood, the movement slow, deliberate. Do you regret it, saving her that night? Her breath caught. Never. For a heartbeat, they stood too close, the air between them electric. His hand lifted, hesitated, then rested lightly against her cheek. Neither do I, he said. The moment stretched too long, too fragile. Then Lorenzo stepped back, the storm in his eyes finally calm. Go to bed, Arya. Tomorrow we start over. She wanted to ask what starting over meant, but for the first time since the flood, she didn't need to. As she walked to the door, he said softly behind her, I meant what I swore. No more blood. Not unless there's no other choice. She turned. And if that day comes? His voice was steady, final. Then I'll fight for us. Not for power. Never again. When she left, he stayed by the window long after the fire died. Outside, dawn began to rise, painting the horizon in pale gold. Lorenzo touched the scar along his knuckles, the mark of the man he'd been, and whispered into the morning, "For them, I will not fall again." It was a vow made in silence, but for the first time, he believed it. Dawn came to the DeLuca estate beneath a sky the color of ash. The storm clouds had finally broken, leaving behind a strange, heavy stillness. It was the kind of morning that felt like it belonged to something ending or something being born. Lorenzo DeLuca stood on the balcony outside his study, the cool wind tugging at his shirt sleeves. Below him, the grounds that had once been guarded by men with guns were almost peaceful now. Almost. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city still whispered his name with fear. The newspapers had already begun to call the attack at the Grand Verona an unsolved massacre. But in his world, there were no unsolved things, only secrets buried deep enough to look like silence. Behind him, Arya Moretti entered quietly. She wore one of Sophia's white sweaters, the hem brushing her thighs, her hair loose from sleep. She looked like she belonged to the light, and yet the world she'd been dragged into would never stop testing that light. "You haven't slept," she said. Lorenzo didn't turn. Sleep feels dishonest when the world keeps trying to burn. "Then stop feeding the fire," she replied. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't. But you made a vow, remember?" He turned then, the pale morning light cutting across his face. "I remember every word." She studied him, the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tension that still lived in his shoulders. "Marcus?" "Alive," he said. "For now." "I sent him to the old estate outside Palermo. No communication, no escape. I promised you no more blood, and I'll keep it. But he won't walk free." Arya nodded slowly. "It's enough." "It's not," he said quietly. "But it's the first time I've chosen mercy over pride." For a long time, neither spoke. The world outside the window was soft, painted gold and gray. Inside, everything was still. Arya stepped closer. "What happens now?" "Now," Lorenzo's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Now we disappear." Her breath caught. "Disappear?" "I've spent my life building a kingdom of fear," he said. "Every stone in this house, every coin in my bank was paid for with blood. I won't let Sophia grow up inside it. The men who serve me will scatter. The ones who try to follow will find nothing left." He turned back to her, his voice steady, resolute. "I'm walking away." The words hung between them, too large, too impossible. Arya searched his face, waiting for the part where he would take them back. But he didn't. "You mean it," she whispered. He nodded once. "For her, for you, for whatever pieces of my soul are still worth saving." Emotion tightened her throat. "Lorenzo, if you do this, there's no going back. That's the point." A faint sound broke the silence, a child's sleepy voice calling from the hallway. "Daddy?" They both turned. Sophia stood there, rubbing her eyes, her bear dangling from one hand. She looked small and fragile in the doorway, framed by morning light. Lorenzo went to her and knelt. "Buongiorno, mia piccola." Sophia yawned. "You promised we'd have pancakes today." He smiled, a rare, unguarded smile. "And I keep my promises." Is action fleet? "Are we going somewhere?" she asked, her voice innocent but curious. He glanced at Arya before answering. "Yes, somewhere new, somewhere safe." Sophia's face brightened. "Will Arya come too?" Lorenzo looked back at her, and something in his eyes softened completely. "She comes wherever we go." Arya's heart stuttered. By afternoon, the estate buzzed with quiet activity, but not the usual rhythm of soldiers preparing for war. This time, they were packing. Paintings came down from walls, documents were burned, keys were handed back. The empire was dissolving, piece by piece, until nothing remained but a house full of memories. Arya watched from the balcony as Lorenzo oversaw the process, his commands precise but calm. It struck her that power didn't leave him. When he gave it away, it transformed. For the first time, she saw not the Don, but the man beneath the title. Later, she found him in the study, folding the last few papers into a box. "It's done," he said. "What will you do now?" He looked around the room, at the remnants of a life built from control. "I don't know, maybe build something that doesn't require fear to stand." Arya moved closer, her voice gentle. "You already have. She's upstairs." He smiled faintly. "Sophia deserves better than the man I've been." "She already has better," Arya said. "She has you now, the man you're becoming." For the first time, Lorenzo let himself breathe. That night, they left under cover of darkness. No convoys, no armed escorts, just one black SUV, stripped of insignia, rolling down a back road that wound away from the city. The house shrank behind them, the iron gates closing for the last time. Sophia slept in the back seat, her head resting against Arya's lap, her fingers clutching the hem of her sweater. Outside, the landscape unfurled, fields glistening under moonlight, mountains standing like ghosts against the horizon. Lorenzo drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the road. The only sound was the hum of the tires and Sophia's soft breathing. After a while, Arya spoke. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" He shook his head. "For most of my life, I didn't think there was a next. There was only survival. But now..." He glanced at her, and the look in his eyes was something she hadn't seen before, peace. "Now I want to find out." Arya smiled faintly. "And if the world comes for us, then it will find nothing left worth taking," he said. "Only a man with his family." Her heart twisted at the word family. It sounded foreign and familiar all at once. She reached across the console, her fingers brushing his. He didn't pull away. Their hands stayed like that, linked between gears and shadows, as the car moved forward into a dawn that felt both terrifying and new. By the time the first light touched the horizon, they had crossed the city limits. The skyline faded behind them, swallowed by mist. Sophia stirred, blinking sleepily. "Where are we now?" "Far enough," Lorenzo said. The girl nodded, content. "Can we build a house with a garden?" Arya smiled. "I think we can manage that." Sophia yawned and nestled against her again. "And no more scary people?" Lorenzo's voice softened. "No more scary people, Piccola." Arya looked at him, and he looked back, both knowing it wasn't entirely true, but also knowing they would face whatever came together. The road stretched ahead, long and endless. Outside the window, the sun climbed higher, painting the fields gold. Lorenzo's hand tightened around hers. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. "The river?" "Yes." Arya nodded slowly. "Sometimes. I think about how close everything came to ending before it began." He smiled, his eyes on the road. It didn't end. It began with fire and water. And now we rise, she finished for him. Lorenzo's grip on her hand softened, a quiet laugh escaping his lips. "Yes, Arya Moretti, now we rise." The car rolled on, the horizon unfolding in front of them, vast, bright, and unwritten. Behind them lay ruin, redemption, and everything they'd lost. Ahead of them waited a life still fragile, still uncertain, but theirs to build. And as the first full light of morning poured through the windshield, washing over their faces, it felt like a promise kept. Because phoenixes don't rise despite the ashes. They rise because of them.